Well, for more on efforts to end the war in Ukraine, I'm joined by Graeme Gill. He's Professor Emeritus of Government and International Relations at the University of Sydney. It's good to see you, Professor Gill. It's interesting that as we talk about ending one war, there's another war that's happening now. It's the war of words this week, and it's been fast moving. I'd like you to first help us just reflect on what's been happening this week and how far the impact of this fading American-Euro relationship could be felt.
Yes, well, what we've seen in the last week or so has been a dramatic escalation in the rhetoric around the Ukraine war. But also what's most remarkable about it is the way in which the American President Donald Trump has seemingly sidelined his NATO allies and decided to go it alone in terms of trying to bring about a peace settlement in that war. But also what he's done has been to put offside not just the Europeans, but also the man that he really needs if any real peace is to be brought about, and that is the Ukrainian president himself, Volodymyr Zelensky. What Trump has done is seemingly said, well, look, I'm going to bring this about regardless of what you, the Europeans, think, and almost regardless of what you, Zelensky, thinks. And unfortunately, what that means is that the likelihood of a peaceful outcome, of an outcome that's going to last, is not very high.
I'd love to get your thoughts on NATO and its relevance just a little later. But first, some analysts, including one that we spoke with this morning, have brought up the idea of President Zelensky being a scapegoat in this episode, because should Trump's negotiation with Putin, fall through, he wouldn't want the US or himself to be blamed for that failure. Do you agree with this? And why else is there antagonism, you think?
Well, yes, that's one possible conclusion one could draw. Clearly, Trump never likes to be blamed for anything that goes wrong. He's historically Mr. Teflon, and none of the mud seems to stick on him. So he does want a scapegoat if things do go wrong. But also, I think he's got a very strong sense of his own importance, and he believes that Zelensky is a much less important leader than he is. That he called him a sort of a failed politician and a failed comedian. He doesn't see Zelensky as being a serious state leader, I think, and what that means is that he's treated him with contempt. And of course, that's not the way to get the sort of agreement that Trump is going to need if he is going to be able to engineer a peace settlement.
Okay, let's get to NATO now. Where does NATO figure right now, this whole week? Is Ukraine's ambitions with this organization still one of the greatest obstacles to peace?
Yes, well, Putin has said, and he's been consistent in this right from before the war started, that Ukraine should not be allowed to join NATO. A lot of the NATO countries actually accept that position, but they're unwilling to say it. Trump has sort of belled the cat by coming out and saying outright that Ukraine will not join NATO. The problem, of course, for NATO is not so much that Ukraine may not become a member, but the fracturing of the structure of the alliance that Trump's actions seem to portend. Because if Trump continues to go on the way he has, treating the Europeans with contempt, treating NATO with contempt, one really wonders what the future of that alliance is, at least in its current form.
And as for the other man who's also been dubbed Teflon Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, he's been asking, of course, NATO countries to pay up their dues by the middle of this year. And if they do, would that change anything?
Well, it may make Trump happier, but even so, by paying up their dues, most of them are not going to lift their spending to 5% of GDP, which is what Trump has called for. But the problem is not so much that. I think the problem is that European confidence in NATO and European confidence in American leadership has now been shaken quite considerably by Trump's actions. And if the Europeans are to get themselves out of this sort of situation, they're going to need leadership. Doesn't seem to me that Mark Rutte is the man to play it, to give that leadership. He's someone with very limited vision and is very inflexible in a whole range of ways. You would normally look to the leaders of the bigger countries. That's France and Germany in particular, but perhaps also Poland. But it's unlikely that most of the alliance of the EU anyway would accept Polish leadership. Macron's basically a lame duck president domestically because of the election that he called last year and the victory or very good performance of the right wing, which undercut his political position. And of course, Germany is in the throes of an election right now, and we don't know what's going to come out of it. So the problem is really the European relationship with the US, and if it continues the way it is, well, as I say, NATO is likely to die a painful death.
Gosh, okay. I want to focus on President Zelensky now. If he does crumble with all this criticism, for example, if he does get dismantled for whatever reason, how could the trajectory of this war change, and who's fit to take over the job as Ukrainian president?
Well, I think there are a number of people in Kyiv who would like the job. I mean, there has been criticism within Ukraine over Zelensky's leadership for quite some time. Some people have said that he should have gone by now, and that what he's done has basically been to make a mess of the war, simply because he seems to intervene at a strategic level, and his decisions are not always particularly well-founded. So his position within Ukraine itself was not as solid as it might have appeared before Trump's criticism. Now, we don't know what Trump's criticism is likely to, what effect it's likely to have, but it is quite possible that the criticism could actually lead to a locking in of support behind Zelensky, because the criticism has in many ways been so unfair and so one-sided. As to the course of the war, I think ultimately, I mean, what we now know is that given the situation on the battlefield, unless the trajectory changes, Russia is going to win the war. Most of the NATO countries know that. Trump knows that. Zelensky also knows that. And you can see that in the way in which his messaging has changed over the last few months. So ultimately, I'm not sure that a change in leadership in Ukraine will come about. And I don't really know that unless you get somebody who is going to, in a sense, see sense and say, let's talk about ending the war, stopping the killing, unless we see somebody like that come to power, I don't think any change will make a great deal of difference.
Appreciate your insight so very much. Graeme Gill, Professor Emeritus, Government and International Relations at the University of Sydney.